Laying new concrete is only part of the story. Granted, it's a pretty crucial part of the story, and we wouldn't be here if there wasn't agreement on the need for more of it, and for a decision on where it should go. But concrete only works if you get aircraft onto it and off it efficiently, and efficiently enough to make it worth the investment. NATS has been helping to inform the Commission's work over the past 2 years, ensuring that the airspace challenge was understood and factored into their decision-making. I should make the point here that NATS input has been primarily from the perspective of the en route airspace, so that's the upper airspace and the wider network, and how a new runway would fit into that wider UK air traffic system. We've said from the outset that any of the 3 shortlisted options were feasible. From an airspace perspective, we could have worked with any of them. And of course, each had different requirements, different challenges, different trade-offs to consider, and different balances of impact and benefit. But now there's a clear recommendation. From an airspace perspective, the 3rd runway proposal for Heathrow is certainly workable. More than that, the work that NATS will need to do to redesign the airspace to support a new runway will actually help meet the conditions that the Commission has seen to include. Airspace, I think it's fair to say, has often been the forgotten pillar of our national air transport infrastructure. We can't see it, we can't touch it, but airlines, airports and passengers can't operate without it. We call it the UK's invisible infrastructure. Our challenge going forward is to weave the new runway into this global system from South East England, where NATS already manages the most complex airspace anywhere in the world. We've got 5 major airports and various smaller ones in a very small geographical area, contributing some 7,000 aircraft climbing and descending across each other every day. That's why we have such a formalised structure. Now, safety, as you would expect, is at the heart of everything NATS does. The beginning, middle and end of every decision we make. We never take it for granted, and we never, ever compromise on it. Introducing another runway is, of course, a challenge, and you can see that it will also require change to adapt the current airspace and route structures to accommodate the additional traffic volumes safely and efficiently. The very nature of aviation is international, so the impacts will not be limited to just the southeast of England or even just the UK. Much of the additional traffic will enter and leave the London region from continental Europe and will affect our neighbours in France, Belgium and the Netherlands, as well as further afield. And they too will need to consider what impact the additional traffic could have on their operations. London airports are, in flying time at least, so close to the boundary of UK airspace that NATS needs to engage ever more closely with our European colleagues to provide effective flow management of traffic in a way that balances the capacity of the airspace, the fuel efficiency of the aircraft and airlines. Real examples of cross-border innovations are already being introduced, and my colleague Paul Haskins will talk more about these tomorrow. Innovations such as new types of queue management to more efficiently stream traffic arriving from continental Europe, and time-based separation, which helps eliminate the impact of strong headwinds on landing, are just some of the kinds of advanced operational concepts and techniques that are at the heart of what we do. It goes without saying that advances in technology will be central to achieving the new runway's optimum performance. The aviation industry needs to exploit the capabilities of modern aircraft, whose performance is vastly improved compared to older aircraft in terms of their ability to climb quickly after takeoff, and whose navigation systems are so accurate that they allow route designs which have the potential to provide some respite for people living below them. At the same time, we have to accommodate aircraft which don't have such sophisticated equipment, so there's a delicate balance here of ensuring optimum performance for a wide range of aircraft capabilities. The existing system of conventional routes is already squeezed, as you saw from the video. Many aircraft in South East England are kept artificially low for long periods because of either other traffic or other airspace structures are above them, preventing them from climbing. NATS will need to modernise the existing route structures. This isn't easy, but the capabilities of modern aircraft mean we can do a great deal to relieve the pressure on the airspace system, whilst also making life a little easier for people on the ground, and I'll come back to that in a moment. New concrete will help increase the resilience of the overall network, as it will provide additional ground infrastructure to be used in the event of system outages, unusual weather or other unforeseen circumstances. One of the challenges throughout this will be to ensure the overall system is just as resilient as today's when it's supporting traffic levels of 2040. Because we should be clear about this, traffic levels are expected to increase significantly from today's level until the new runway is operational and will increase further after that. At the moment, the UK traffic volumes are around about the levels that we last saw 10 years ago. So the recession took away some of the immediate urgency to modernise the system. But the traffic is now edging back up, and we expect it to reach the levels of the previous peak of 2008 by around 2020. The impact on the environment from both noise and pollution aspects has been a stated feature of the Airports Commission assessments. Of course, noise matters, and matters most to people who live close to airports, who understandably worry about the possibility of routes changing. But as the airports debates has heated up, we're seeing more and more people becoming more aware of noise and watching for any perceptible changes in the patterns of aircraft above them. There's still a lot more work to do. This is a major challenge for the entire aviation sector. The airlines and airports, NATS as the operator of the airspace, the CAA, which is responsible for implementing the airspace policy, and the government, which is responsible for setting that policy in the first place. And of course, it's a challenge for communities too. We all fly, and we all benefit from the great connections we have in the UK. And that means the industry and local communities have to find ways of coexisting. NATS will continue to work with all of the airports who are responsible for the low-level departure and arrival routes to deliver the most linkages we can with the wider high-level international network. So let's be clear, a new runway will mean new routes, and it will mean changes to existing routes, and we know that isn't easy. NATS can and will use our airspace design expertise to support the airports in minimising the overall impact. Inevitably, there is a balance to be achieved, but there will be improvements, not just for the airspace users, but also for people living below. For instance, through a combination of ground and air-based technology combined with modern airspace design, we aim to end routine holding. Passengers can expect to arrive on time as a matter of course. Predictable arrival times in the early morning will support the maintenance of the night ban. And airlines can expect reduced fuel consumption and CO2 emissions in addition. Getting rid of the holds means we'll be able to depart modern, efficient, capable aircraft into more efficient, higher airspace more quickly, which in turn will help remove or reduce the noise footprint on the ground, as well as the wider environmental impact. Modern navigation capabilities will allow us to offer predictable and maintainable respite routes, so people will know when they're likely to have aircraft overhead, and also, equally important, when they won't have aircraft overhead. Let's not lose sight of the prize at the end of this. There's a huge prize. The UK has worked incredibly hard to capitalise on its geographical opportunity as Europe's transatlantic gateway, handling somewhere around 80% of the transatlantic flights, and it is still a hub country of choice for global travellers. Preserving that position is critical, helping the UK maintain air links with emerging markets and the economic benefits that flow from that accessibility. We will maximise the benefits of the new runway when all the stakeholders work together. Seamless ATC provision, efficient airport ground operations, airlines delivering to an agreed schedule, a framework from the CAA for substantial airspace changes that will be required to exploit the additional capability, and clear policy direction from government. Of course, we also need to work closely with the local communities. We will need to be able to demonstrate that we have done as much as we can to deliver an optimal solution that balances the operational need with the environmental impact. Heathrow is, by a very large margin, the most efficient dual runway airport in the world, and I am immensely proud of NAT's contribution to that position. Operating a third runway from Heathrow brings its own unique challenges, integrating 740,000 movements every year from an enlarged Heathrow into the wider airspace network. I'm confident we can design the airspace to provide the necessary support for this additional capacity and deliver environmental improvements. I'm very proud of the role that NATS plays in our industry and our record of innovation and service improvement in recent years. It will take a great effort of partnership and innovation to deliver the new runway into service. And I'm totally confident that with everyone's full commitment, we can make it happen. I'm also very pleased that the Airports Commission has made a clear recommendation. It makes it much more straightforward for us in starting work to design the airspace of the future, and NATS looks forward to helping deliver the additional capacity which is so important to the UK economy. Like everyone else, I very much hope that the government will make its decision swiftly to ensure this much-needed capacity comes online as quickly as it possibly can. Major infrastructure improvements require strong conviction and bold decisions. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.
So you've heard how the Commission's conditions have come up repeatedly on night flights and on noise. Does NATS have a position on those?
So we work within whatever framework is required in the environment. So from our perspective, if it was established that the conditions are there will be no early morning or nighttime arrivals or departures, then we'd work to ensure that. We have a slightly strange role in the world in that we deliver an ATC service to whoever shows up on the day. So no matter what time an aircraft shows up, it expects to get a service from NATS, and that's our job, and to do that safely. So if we can work with the airlines and the airport to make sure that the flights are scheduled at the appropriate times, then absolutely we can help enforce that, or certainly with the tools that we have, make sure that it happens in the right way. It'll be for others, obviously, to decide whether that's appropriate and just how that would work in practice, but we play our part in that.
But does a ban on night flights make your job more difficult?
No, not particularly. I mean, we operate 24/7 anyway, as you've seen. There is a sort of quieter period in the middle of the night, but we're really talking about a relatively small number of flights in the early morning. To some extent, we've been pushing for a more of an on-time arrival scheme across the sort of the airline world in terms of not arriving early in your planned time, because that's when we end up with the holds filling up. So from our perspective, we can work with any of those schemes.
Chris Sergeant from Green Air Online. Stacking is obviously a problem at Heathrow at the moment, and I wonder whether you've done any sort of calculations on what a third runway might do in terms of reducing stacking, in terms of CO2 emissions and fuel, even if the traffic remained at the same level as it is now.
I think those are probably slightly different questions in there. If you assume that the traffic levels stayed the same as they were now when there was an additional runway, then clearly it would be very easy for that additional runway to take up effectively the additional or the capacity that's required in order to remove the holding. What we're working on is looking at how do we cope with the additional capacity and at the same time remove holding. In terms of have we done the work, we haven't done the detailed work yet. That's still to come. There'll be a whole set of work that's required to build those airspace structures and to work out what they need to look like. But we are very confident that with the modern tools available to us, we have here an opportunity, probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, to modernise the whole airspace, and in doing so, remove some of the structures that are in there because of past airline capabilities or past aircraft capabilities, and modernise it to the benefit of everyone. So we're very confident that we can make improvements as part of this, and including in that the additional capacity.
I mean, is UK airspace going to look very different?
Is it going to look very different? Not as different as it would have done with some of the other schemes, probably, particularly some of the ones that weren't shortlisted. It won't look, I mean, the traffic flows, the general traffic flows, as you'll have seen from that film, are generally out over the ocean or from across the ocean and down into Europe. So the basic flow of aircraft will look roughly the same. In terms of how we get the aircraft from the ground into that wider structure will look very different. We'll have far more precision-based routes that allow more respite and more repeatable respite. We'll have far more opportunities for continuous climb up to an altitude, which is better from the perspective of noise on the ground. We'll have far more continuous descents, whereby the aircraft can use less power to come in, and probably steeper descents too, so keeping aircraft higher over London, over populated areas. So to the non-expert, it might not look that different, but it certainly will feel different and look different from the travelling public's perspective, and for those, more importantly, overflown.
Well, slightly technical question. I'm not sure I'm competent to ask it even. But,
that's all right. I might not be competent to answer it.
If you remove the holds, which is your ambition, aircraft tend to join the holds at, I don't know, 10, 12, 15,000 feet and leave them at 7.
Yeah.
So will the aircraft stay high?
Yeah.
And will departing aircraft stay higher because they can avoid them?
Yes.
I've understood it.
The short answer to your question is yes. What we're already currently doing is inserting speed controls into a lot of the aircraft that are coming from a certain distance apart. We do it from about 350 miles. So what we do is we slow down aircraft slightly or speed them up by 1 or 2 or 3 knots and allow ourselves to get the sequence ready for arrival into Heathrow, which already has reduced holding by about 1 minute on average, which is quite considerable because average Heathrow holding is about 9 minutes. per aircraft that holds. So what we'll do is we'll slow them down or speed them up a little bit. We'll also move any kind of holding structures much higher and probably out further over, maybe over the seas, depending on which airport you're talking about. And that allows then, effectively lifts the lid on the airspace and allows all of the departing aircraft to get up higher quicker and all the arriving aircraft to do much more continuous descent, which is a quieter way to do it. So effectively, we're kind of lifting the lid on the southeast of the UK as part of this redesign.
And Martin, I mean, NATS is part of the Single European Sky
Yes.
initiative. How do you see the third runway and the issues it raises fitting into that?
The Single European Sky is really related to interoperability and connectivity. So the idea is it defragments Europe from a perspective of airspace procedures and air traffic procedures. So effectively what it says is I should be able to take off in Prague and I should be able to fly to Lisbon and I shouldn't have to get any complications around different countries as I go through. It should be just a seamless activity. The third runway plays a part in that, but I wouldn't say it plays any greater part than any other aspect of our daily airport life, if you like. So effectively, all of the large airports are part of the Single European Sky scheme. All of them are effectively getting funding from the Commission to allow them to be part of that. And it's really about connectivity. It's just about making sure that if your aircraft is due to depart on at a particular time, then you have all the information, the airport has all the information, the airlines have all the information, all of the centres that they're going to pass through as it covers the UK and then across the rest of Europe are all ready, if you like, and willing to take that aircraft. So it kind of takes out that thing when you're sitting there saying, well, we would have taken off 3 hours ago, but unfortunately there's a delay over Macedonia. So it tries to deal with some of that.
Right. Okay, lovely, thank you. And there's a question over there. Thank you.
Sally Pavey from Cagney again. You say that the Heathrow flight paths will change with the new runway and that they're going to be much higher on departure and arrivals. How does that affect all the aircraft going to the other airports? Because obviously Gatwick's trapped beneath Heathrow flight paths at the moment, so we not only get Heathrow and Stansted and northern flights as well as Gatwick. So how will that affect all the other flight paths in and out of the other airports?
So it depends is the answer. I probably can't give you a single answer to that. Broadly speaking, as we lift the lid on the airspace and as we move some of these airspace structures up higher, then that gives capacity for the whole of the southeast of England to do more continuous climbs and more continuous descents. So broadly speaking, so if you take Gatwick as an example, some of Gatwick's routes are currently constrained by Heathrow overflights above them, or in some cases some of the departures are constrained by the Heathrow holds, the 4 holds that are around Heathrow. As they move, that frees up some of the space for use from other airports. So what we're looking at here is a holistic approach to the airspace design for the entire country broadly, not just the southeast of England. But effectively what we're looking at is how do we make the most efficient use of that scarce resource. So it will absolutely, undoubtedly have an effect on Gatwick departures, Luton departures and so on. But the idea would be that it is of benefit to all. Now, will there be winners and losers on individual routes? I'm sure there will be, and that will be part of the debate as to how we deal with some of those. And that will be partly around government policy as to how we treat noise and so on. But yes, broadly speaking, there will be changes to all sorts of different airport departure routes and arrival routes.
Francis Tyrrell from Pinson Masons. Just curious, really, building on that question. In order to do a proper job at Heathrow and in order to maximise all the benefits you said we could potentially do, is there a case, is it either desirable or even necessary to effectively close down one of the smaller London suborbital airports?
Certainly, from our perspective, we wouldn't take a view on closing down airports. What we look at is the total capacity across the network. So one of the things I think in the Commission's report, it notes that a third runway will have an impact on departures and arrivals to Northolt, and would give some constraints to that. Our job is to factor all of those in. We can obviously say this is what we believe to be safe. We wouldn't operate above that. It will have implications. I wouldn't say that there's any sense that there would need to be a recommendation to close one or other airport. And in fact, I'd actually say that probably this particular outcome of a third runway has less of an impact on some of those other airports than perhaps if the runway capacity had been put in a place where there wasn't already existing runway capacity.
Jane Middleton, Chairman of BARTA. Martin, how do you see working with the airlines going forward? You talked about partnership and that sort of thing, so how do you see NATS having to engage closer or more?
So I think we already engage pretty comprehensively with the airlines, particularly the domestic ones, but not solely the domestic ones. In terms of engagement going forward, I think it's really about operating to plan. The whole of the UK network works well if everybody's playing their part. And if you imagine, our job is to sort of juggle the moving parts and make sure everybody gets to their destination as close to on time as they possibly can, taking into account that the various challenges that the airlines have that they don't necessarily have control over. So I think one of the things that we're looking at, and one of the things we'd like to talk to the airlines more about, is how do we get to a schedule that is more outcome-based rather than input-based. So as an example, and this may be a little bit controversial, but it shouldn't really matter to some degree what time you depart as long as you arrive at your destination on time, particularly for transiting passengers. So one of the things we're spending quite a lot of time looking at is how do we move to a more on-time arrival or required on-time arrival sort of world rather than a what time you push back from the gate, because actually what time you push back from the gate, apart from being, I mean, it's quite convenient to know obviously what time you have to be at the gate as a passenger, but actually in the long run, what time you arrive is more important. And if you look at the system now, effectively anybody can show up at any time and we just deal with it, and largely that's what leads to things like holding. So I can see us working more closely with the airlines in that regard. We're also working very closely with them already on things like the time-based separation that we've put into Heathrow already, which allows us to change the spacing between the aircraft depending on the headwinds to keep a constant time between them. And that allows us to build more resilience into the system. So I think we're doing more of that already. I think as we go through the whole process of bringing a third runway online and the additional strain that's going to put on the overall UK network, we'll need to start looking at how we work even more closely or ever more closely with all of our airline customers.
Martin, I have just one final question, which is, does NATS have any concerns about more flights over central London?
No, we don't have any more. We don't have any concerns over flights over central London. We don't treat flights over central London any differently to how we treat flights over any part of the country. They're all equally as important, and safety is by far our #1 priority. So no, flights over London are not a concern in that respect.
Okay. All right. On that note, we shall draw it to a close. Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you.